Thank you for inviting me, both Anna, Hans, and Jap, for organizing this. For us, it's a little bit critical because here in Tarragona we are still on holiday for a week more, but it's not a problem. I always enjoy to talk about what we do, especially with a very mixed audience like the one that we have in this group in this domain. So I'm going to talk about some research line that we've been doing in our research group, focused on understanding behavioral patterns from a computer science physics point of view, where we've been interacting. You'll see that this is a very interdisciplinary work that's been done with economists, psychologists, and we've been trying to create a new type of experimentation using what I said, citizen science, and also other parts like gamification. So I'm going to be a little bit fast because 15-20 minutes is not a lot of time. So I will do a really short explanation of what we do, but then I'll give it to you if you want to learn more. I'll just give you my contacts in terms of if you want to get a little bit more detail about specific experiment or other things that we've been doing. So to contextualize what we've been doing, when you think about behavioral experimentation, the classical setting that comes to mind is this kind of lab that you see in these behavioral economics departments or even psychology departments, where you have a lot of computers in a room, and then they ask people to come here and they do some sort of experiment to try to evaluate something, okay? And the biggest problem that we found in these kind of laboratories, well, they're the two biggest problems that we think they have. The first one is that the type of people that participate in this type of studies are usually students, which create a bias in terms of the analysis, but also they are very artificial settings. So they are settings that are within a lab, in a laboratory, so people won't behave naturally when they go here and do something. And with the explosion of the internet and social networks, we have another source of data, which is social networks, for instance, and all the traces that people leave online. But the other problem that we have in this thing is that we look at the data from the distance. So we cannot interact with the data. And when people try to do that, it's a problem because probably you know scandals about people manipulating some sort of emotions or moods in Facebook, things like that. And I know that there are ethic experts here, and these kind of things are not allowed by the community. And usually it's hard to do experimentation within these type of systems. So our goal was to try to fill the gap between these two extreme worlds, right? And we created the idea of these scales of computational social science. Computational social science is something that in the domain has been taught a lot. So we think that there are these two different scales, the micro scale, which is what happens at the behavioral labs, and the micro scale, which happens at the social networks, where you have huge big data, but not quality data. But we try to fill the gap in this, creating what we call the mesoscale of computational social science, which are experiments that are not massive, but they have enough data to have relevant conclusions, but also to collect high quality data about what participants do. And we do that through what we call pop-up experiments. Okay, that's a definition on a paper that we more or less created with some colleagues in the Universitat of Barcelona. So how we do that? We took the classical free experimental framework, the one that the screens that usually you see in this kind of behavioral economics labs, and we added two main ingredients. The first one is citizen science. So we took the philosophy of citizen science and we applied to this type of experiments. So we made people to participate more active within the experiment, to come and give them voluntarily their data. But also we added some extra principles that follow citizen science, which is the idea of creating this knowledge building. So people that come also get some sort of feedback. They learn something by participating. So it's not for free. So they come and they get something in return. So people get involved within the research process. But also it's more open, so created in open spaces, so we don't make it close at the university. We foster participation. We try to make it with more heterogeneous groups, so try to break everything that I say that is wrong. So here are examples of people participating in our experiments. You can see people from other galaxies also coming to participate. And the other ingredient that we also included in our experiments to make them more appealing is we took game design principles. I've been a professor of game design for almost 20 years. And we took these ideas that are aligned with this idea of game design about that probably you know more that about gamification process, right? To include within the experiment the user engagement, some narrative to increase the knowledge of what you're doing, and to create fun experiences. So it's not something really, let's say, static or let's say empty, right? So we try to create something a little bit more depth when we create. So instead of having this kind of screens, we did an experiment about the stock market. We create more clean screens with the right information that we want to use. So we create story. This one had a kind of a bad guy, which is this one, which was Mr. Bank. So you had to fight him. So through the experiment, you give your data, but also you have some experience. Also, and then we created these rewards, etc. So people want to play. So at the end, we want people not to come because they want to do the experiment, but also they have something else in return. And this has been very useful. So creating these two, we created this experimental platform. We have now one published, which is called Citizenship Lab. And through this platform, we can go anywhere to the street. I'll put you a video at the end about one experiment that we made in Barcelona in the middle of the street. But we just need a tablet, a computer, a router, and some iPads that we rent. And with that, we can create experiments that run simultaneously anywhere we want. Okay. And with that, we collect a lot of high quality data, and we focus and we can design experiments that can give us, let's say, information that has not previously collected. Okay, and you can see here again some people playing in one of these experiments, and these three people that you see standing here are people from my research group and a research group in Barcelona that were helping and assisting the participants. So to give you an example about the kind of things that we do, I'm going to talk, we've done more than 10 experiments with this. I'm going to explain this one, which is, I'm going to do a really, really short explanation, as I said. I can give a full talk about each of the experiments, but probably this is one of the ones that we are mostly proud because it gave us like a boost in terms of popularity of the platform. This was an experiment that we used to exactly say what I presented at the beginning, to try to identify behavioral patterns in participants, in humans, right? And to do that, we face people with social dilemmas. So the idea of these social dilemmas that you have people, I'm not going to do a full game theory class here because that's not the goal, but just to present you one idea that we do that. So we have people sitting together, and then they have these tablets and they have to play. But basically, on the back of the system, we have that two people have some screen with some decision, and they have to choose one thing, to cooperate with the other one or to defect with the other. Right? That's classic game theory. It's the most basic. And then depending on the decision that each takes, there is an outcome that affects both of them. Okay, and then this is controlled with what we call the payoff matrix. Basically, I'd say if both cooperate, they get this value, and if both defect, they got this other value. If one cooperates and the other defects, these are the rewards that they get. Okay, that's, as I say, one of the most simple game theory games that you can find. And depending on how people act, because as I said, depending on the values that we put in these parameters and this matrix, sorry. We have different type of games. We have one game that we call the harmony game, which is everyone should cooperate, everyone should be happy. So there is no reason to not cooperate and be positive with the other ones. There are games that focus on people doing the opposite of the other one. For people that people should do the same as the other one. So people, if both of them cooperate, they win. If both of them they defect, they win. They win more, I mean. And games that probably this is the most classical one, the prisoner's dilemma, that people that actually the best or the more rational solution to get the maximum benefit is to defect, to betray the other person. Okay, it's a really fast game theory class. Instead of presenting this matrix, if you present this to a kid that is 12 years old or someone that maybe don't have a high level of education, it may be difficult to follow. So usually we try to translate the classical matrix into something that is more simple. So explain it. If you do that and the other one does that, you get this and the other one gets that. okay? And usually we train people before they start playing so they understand exactly the mechanic of the game. But also we try to present this in a more like visual way. As I said, we create story about a doctor that is crazy and with the brains, and with instead of making people choosing cooperate or defect, we put colors. So we just try to like standardize, normalize, so that makes the validity of the experiment much higher. And we take this to a fair in Barcelona. It's called the Duch. It's a board game fair, and we have thousands of visitors in there. We have some space, and we did that for at least 3 years in a row. So we have a small space there, and we ask people coming to this fair to come to our place and play the game. So we collect their data, but they also are playing within this framework. Okay. Again, some screens. In this case, we had this guy dressed as the doctor. So we try to create the full story. So as I said, it's this idea of engaging people, not by just going to an empty room, but also having some more interesting experience. So you see here again, this guy here with the bird on the corner is my PhD student who focused on creating this platform. And with that, we can collect a lot of data. And then you have people playing 13 times in this case, but I think that that's one of the most interesting things, that we make people to do a very repetitive task again and again and again. But since we are putting this extra layer of fun and participation, people just want to add and play more and give you more data. So we just start collecting data from several subjects, and in few hours, because this one was short, we collected data from 500 subjects, which is a really large sample compared to what people usually do in behavioral economics. And this was collected in just 6-7 hours. And for some experiments, we've gone to 2,000 subjects participating in a full weekend. So I think it's pretty reasonable. So we get all this data, and then we try to answer some questions. And I'm going to be just giving question and answer. I'm not going to get into details of how we get. But for instance, one question is, are people rational? So there is the game theory that says people should behave like this if they want to maximize benefit. And when we look at the data, we see that people don't maximize benefit. There are different behaviors that are not fully rational, which is something that we already know, that humans are not fully rational. So, and then we wanted to know more about what happens here. Why we see people cooperating. Red is cooperate, blue is defect, is betray. So people, let's say, betray more than they should, right? To do that, we try to answer other questions. For instance, is people behaving consistently in different types of games? And also, can we classify people into groups? And I'm going to talk about this because this is, for me, one of the interesting key things. When we look at if people behave similarly, this is a plot, and each of the vertical lines is the summary of the answers of the people, if they cooperate, red, if they defect, blue. So we see that we do some clustering here, and we see that there are 30% of the people that more or less have a very similar pattern in terms of cooperating in just one game and defecting in the other 3. We have 20% of the people that cooperate in these 2 games, in the top 2, and defect in the other 2. We have another 20% of the people that cooperate in the first and the third, but don't cooperate in the other 2, that defect in the other 2. We have about another 20% of the people that cooperate everywhere, right? And people that we don't know exactly what they do. let's call it this way. So, and I think that's very interesting because we see that even if we think that we are very different, that each one of us has unique ideas, we see that at the large scale, at the higher level, the macro scale level, we can see that that's not true because there are some patterns that are repeated by many people at the same time, okay? And the second thing that we do is, can we actually classify and tag these people? So we did this part of trying to see if we can, for each of these 5 groups, see if there is something that can explain what they are doing, okay? So for instance, we see that the first, there is one group, these are the 20%. One group that just always tries to maximize their winnings. Another group that tries to maximize the minimum winning. Okay, so people that are more risk averse and people that are less risk averse. So we have people that is envious. We call it envious, basically because they just want to have more than the other one. Okay, and that's the way to play if you want to get that. Okay, people that are trustful, but we call that they cooperate everywhere, and people that we don't know what they do. And the nice thing about these groups is that they emerge by themselves. It's not that we actually tagged, we choose, okay, we want to like have these 5 categories. Instead, we went to the data told us these 5 different behaviors that we see. Okay, so we didn't create the theory first and we looked for the data that support the theory. We went to the data, and by looking at the data, we see the behavioral patterns that emerge. I think that's very different from the typical approaches that people do. Okay, and that's the summary. Another thing that we have tried to do is, okay, these are groups that are clearly easy to explain because there's a simple mathematical rule that describes. And one of the other things that we work in our research groups, well, I'm belonging into two different groups, but in both we work about data or behavior prediction. So if we know that the user belongs to the optimist group, can I anticipate the kind of answer that they are going to give? So we look, if I look at 5 answers and I tag them into group, then the next 10 answers, with about 70% of 70% of the times, I'll tag you exactly where you belong. Okay. With this type of experiment, we get, or this type of model that describes, we get a good prediction. But if you want to go to higher prediction models, then you have to go to more complicated things. This is another model that we created. It's not simple. It's a lot more complex with a lot of mathematical formulas. It's called mixed membership stochastic block model, where we see that people don't have just one strategy, that they have a merge of different strategies. And with that, we can increase prediction. And this is what we are right now, because we are in between models that can explain and classify people easily with a nice, let's say, formula that tells you this happens because of the reason. And then we have also really complicated models that gives you high prediction, okay, high anticipation, but they are much more complex to understand. So what we are doing right now, and these last couple of years, is we are moving to the field of interpretation or model interpretation to be able to like have this explanation of machine learning models, of deep learning models, how we can actually get more about models that predict better, but also can be better explained. So this is something that we have been doing in the last few years. And to finalize, I'm going to put a video of another experiment. I don't know if it's going to be heard the sound, but either way, it's this experiment is basically an experiment that we did to understand if people can collaborate fighting climate change. Okay. Again, same setting, etc. Can you hear the sound? More or less. Okay.
Yeah, we can do.
Okay, so again, another experiment, and you'll see that for this one we created physical setting in Barcelona. So we went to the street and we actually created balloons that, depending on the answers of the people, represented that they were contributing more or less carbon emissions. So it was creating the full experience. You can see here the tablet with our software, the instructions on how to play. And this is, again, this is a version of a typical game theory. Also, there's another game, it's a public goods game, where people have to collaborate for a public good. In this case, it's something called a risk aversion game, where you have to collaborate to avoid risk that it's coming in the future. Okay. So, well, as I say, this is not an example of an experiment. We've done experiments with even with mental health people, with the mental health community. We studied different roles, etc. So we've been playing a lot with game theory and behavioral settings. So summary, I know it's been a very fast talk with a lot of information, but 3 or 4 things that we've done. First one is this idea of changing the idea of experimental setups to make them open, participatory, and including this idea of citizen science to make the people learn about what they do, about like having some feedback about the interaction of giving their data into this type of experiments. That the key for us is it's the inclusion of both, including participatory science, but also the part of game design, the fact of having fun, having this engagement of the users, but always maintaining scientific rigor, because then we have to publish that. So we have to have validations of everything. We have to do a lot of testing, a lot of data validation, data cleaning. So we guarantee that the data that comes out from here, it's data that can be used and give us some scientific theories. And we've published a lot of papers that prove that. These 2 examples that I showed, the one is that we have this idea of behavioral phenotypes. That's how we call them. Okay, in these dyadic games that can be reduced into 4 main that we identify: envious, optimist, pessimist, and trustful. And for the experiment on climate change, we see that the effort of the participants decreases with their capital. That's what we observed. I haven't been talking about that, but we see that the richest people were the ones that collaborated the less in terms of fighting climate change. Okay, so we have a lot of papers about this. Probably that's not the place of, but if anyone wants some readings, I can send. And these are some
we will share the slides with all participants.
Okay, Hans. So I can give you all this information. These are some summaries, some screens of different games that we've done. The one about the stock market, I haven't talked about this, but we try to understand people, how people understand uncertainty in the market, but not expert people, but regular people, if they can anticipate the market, things like that. These 2 experiments of their brain are the ones that shown. The one for we have even created experiments for mobility in the city, one experiment to create smoking with a health institute. So we've been trying to combine these 3 things: human behavior, citizen science, and games. Okay, and to finalize, this is some of the group that have been collaborating with this. On top of is people from my university, but we have been collaborating with universities in Madrid, in Barcelona, in Zaragoza. We have other companies that helped us to create all this fancy infrastructure, design, etc. It's a lot of fun to create and interact with all these people because it's, as you can see, a very creative part. And that's all from my side. I tried to be as fast as I could with a 20-25 minutes. I have a lot to speak, to talk about, but unless I guess you got an idea of the kind of things that we do within the computational social science field. And that's all from my side.
Thank you very much. And the floor is now open for echoes and questions. And if I may, I would like to discuss a little bit on your concept of citizen involvement. And I would like to relate it to the talk by Pietro, who talked about design and co-design by external stakeholders. So what I understand from your talk, I know nothing about cybersecurity, but I'm pretty well aware of game theory and metagame theory. You talk about citizen involvement in terms of controlled experimentation. And then I would like, but there are situations where citizen science would be appropriate. For example, in smart city, the design of the public space or architecture, where the idea of co-design, as also Pietro discussed it, would be appropriate. So could you
Yeah.
say a little bit more about the participation of citizens in terms of controlled experiment, where they are not really participants because you want to control it, versus actual involvement in terms of co-design.
So I haven't talked about this. This has been led a little bit more by the people at Barcelona, but we have been working together with, even we have an European project that is focused on co-creation of experiments. So for instance, we had one in schools, and I think it was schools in Greece, in Spain, and some Western country, I don't remember which one, some Eastern, sorry. So we went to the schools and we ask people to create the experiment or to actually find a problem and identify which was the right dilemma to try to answer about or to ask about this problem. So we made this co-creation process with the persons or the students in this case that were going to be the ones creating or running the experiment. So we just put the tool for them. They come with the questions. We work together to create what we need within the platform. And then we run the experiment together with them, and they actually understand the solution to the problem that they posed at the beginning. So we've done the full process. I know that I presented only, let's say, the second part. So we are the ones that designed the experiment, and we go out and we ask people to voluntarily participate. But we also have done the first part, the co-creation of the experiment together with them. In some cases, we have been the ones saying we want to study this theory. In some cases, we've gone out and said, okay, we have this issue. How do we should approach this issue? Let's create a group, discuss about this, and let's translate that into the platform. Then my PhD student collected the ideas from the students and transformed that into like getting the right social dilemmas, building the platform. And then we went out back with them and we did the experiment with them. So we actually have done that.
Okay, thank you very much. And possibly in the future, there will be a similar research conference where you can also talk about the other parts.
We've been in the Citizen.
Thank you very much. We are moving to our next speaker, Lucy Viktorova from Palacký University, Olomouc, in fact, the Department of Psychology. And you are going to talk about the digital related research at the Department of Psychology at Palacký. Yeah. So please go ahead, share your slides.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for having me here. I am here actually on behalf of Dr. Klára Seitlova, who is the, I would say, main cooperator within the Aurora consortium. But as we do quite a lot of research at our department, not everything is really related to the digital society. We were thinking we can give you just a quick brief overview of what we do and maybe how we do it so that we can discuss it later or actually tomorrow also during the discussion. So we called our presentation Going Digital, so the research at the Department of Psychology at Palacký University. And I hope you can see my slides now, just a quick nod. Yeah, okay, cool. Just so that you have a bit of context, we have quite a lot of research group at the department and everybody is doing something a bit different. So we have the work in organizational psychology, traffic psychology, educational psychology, clinical psychology, all that stuff. But I think we can find common research topics. So hopefully you'll be able to see that too. And what's also important that each pre-graduate and graduate students at our department writes a research-based thesis. So there are virtually no just theoretical thesis written. So we put a lot of emphasis on the research methods and teaching of research methods and statistics at our department. And it seems like a good way to go. So from the research topics that we did or are still doing and that are connected a bit to the digital world, it's first working with or within semi or fully virtual teams, which got really relevant within the past 2 years, as well as the remote teaching. So I try to focus on the teachers and students' perspective on digital teaching and learning. while nobody was actually used to it before in that scope that we are now. And also we did a research on the possibilities for online psychosocial care. The thing that emerges from all that are actually quite similar pieces of knowledge, and I hope there will be visible by the end of the presentation. So to go straight ahead to the virtual teamwork, which was actually the work of Dr. Saitlova, done together with the Department of Applied Economics. So this was quite similar, what they do is quite similar to the behavioral economic games like we have just heard about. But this research was about or done within a teaching program designed to foster virtual communication skills. So it was the 1 semester long subject for cross-border virtual teams for Czech students and for Polish students. So there were 28 students taking part in there, and their task was to develop a business plan for a company they could start. And they had several meetings online, which were moderated by the teachers. And then they were also asked to meet, well, not in private, but on their own terms. But all of that was conducted virtually. And they were observed by the teachers who were also the moderators and the researchers. And some findings that came from this, I wouldn't call it experiment, but actually the course was that first, the clear instructions are not always clear. So even if everybody nods at the beginning that they understand, it doesn't mean that they are going to do what you wanted them to do. So what we found out is that when working in virtual teams, you really need to have a full session on clearing the possible questions and answers and really rephrasing what everybody is supposed to do, because otherwise it stays unclear and you only find out by the end, which isn't really desirable. And preferably not to have this just at the beginning, but also some halfway through when the people are already working on a task, so they stay on the right path. The other thing was that the technical equipment might be a problem. This is something we have seen across all our research done with the digital environment, because not everybody still has a good webcam, microphone. They might not know how to use it, especially if you're using different platforms. So everything has to be tested beforehand, just before the start of the experiment, before the starting of the lectures, and whatever. And I think people tend to forget that the more they are themselves used to using ICT, but really just to make clear that everyone knows what to use and how to use it seems to be quite crucial so that everything works. And also what we found out that when even when you should assure that everybody has the language proficiency level, for example, they are supposed to supply an FCE certificate or stuff like that. Even if the students do have that, it doesn't mean that they are able to communicate in that language at the level you are expecting them to, which might then pose a bit of a barrier within the communication. So when we're going to develop another online teaching program, they really should be at least a subject on intensive language training, because really not everybody who has a certificate is on that communication skill level, sometimes needed for real teamwork or especially virtual teamwork. In that case, also the Google Translate comes really in handy. So it's a good thing that they've get along with that. But what we found out, even despite these barriers, the creativity itself was not hindered, and the different background of the students, meaning the Czech and Polish culture, was actually of an advantage. So virtual teams can work even across the borders. There are just some things to watch out for when conducting such collaboration. And one more thing that Dr. Saitlova wanted me to stress out was the within the stages of the group forming, which you might probably be familiar with. When it comes to virtual teams and virtual groups, there is a crucial stage of ICT and norming in terms of ICT use. Because as I've mentioned before, it's not just that people might not have the physical equipment, but they might not be familiar with the use, or they might each want to use a different platform. For example, some would like to use, I don't know, Dropbox, others would like to use Google Disk. So this splittering is not really an ideal thing to do within a virtual team. So there should be an explicit stage focused on the technology, what to use, how to use it, and when to use it, because otherwise you can have like spam email communications when for something that could have been done within a chat. So more useful for a synchronous communication and stuff like that. So this is probably something to keep in mind when designing maybe a teaching course that should be virtual. So we wanted to stress that. And it actually goes nice with the other topics I'd like to present. This is the remote teaching, which is, there are topics of engaging students and teacher-students relationship, but it's really ongoing right now. So far, I only have like anecdotal evidence, but it's very similar to the research done by Dr. Saitlova with the virtual teams. So what I'm basing these findings on is my in-class discussions with my undergraduate students of educational psychology, and then anonymous survey among our students, and faculty meetings and online survey among our soon-to-be graduates. And all of those people were discussing the advantages and disadvantages of online or remote teaching, or the problems they might have, and tips for improvement. And again, the findings from all those discussions was that there is a huge role of communication and trust going on within the virtual environment, because it seems to be a bit different still to the face-to-face teaching and learning, for example, or especially in the case of online exams, because it's kind of like an arms race. At one hand, you have the teachers who would like their exams, when they're online tests or whatever, be like foolproof and cheating proof. But on the other hand, there are students who might feel that they are being distrusted or called cheaters. And so we try to come up with measures to prevent cheating. And on the other hand, it's impossible to prevent cheating, because students come up with ways how to bypass our measures. And if they are honest, they feel really, disencouraged by those measures. So they're feeling like under a lot of pressure, and they generally do not like that kind of pressure. So I would say, ongoing hypothesis is that within the online teaching or remote teaching, the first task or purpose should be to establish mutual trust and trustful relationships. And this could be only done with open and frequent communication, or through open and frequent communication. And then maybe some of those glitches might be prevented, and we won't feel that much of a need to prevent every possibility for cheating, and the students won't feel so much pressure or so much distrust from our side. So that was kind of interesting. The other thing is, which you probably also know, students like engagement, prompt feedback, and a lot of additional sources available as their study materials. And this might seem quite straightforward, but still I've encountered situations where either one of these wasn't really working, or there wasn't a understanding among the sides of the students and the teachers as to what is expected or meant by, for example, sources and stuff like that. So, but this is something that's really good to have. For example, even if you have online lectures, so it's not just you talking, but actually engaging the students through, I don't know, activities, breakout rooms, simple surveys and stuff like that. So really worked well. And when it came to the final state exams, which were usually held oral, face-to-face at our department, the majority of students have preferred to have them face-to-face and like in person, because it seems that with the final state exams, there is a aspect of a transition ritual, so to say. So you really want to meet the people, see your teachers in person and kind of, say goodbye. And it's kind of a cultural event, I would say. So doing this online seemed, well, it was necessary because we couldn't have done it in person, but it was kind of missing something. This was really perceived by the students as well as by the teachers. So just as an interesting point that people might, have also other considerations when it comes to online exams than just the difficulty level and technical problems and stuff like that. They might also place an emphasis on the human side of teaching, maybe, and all of that. So that's good to know. And finally, the online psychosocial care, which seems to be quite distant from all that. We tried to ask our practitioners, like our graduates, as to how did they do their job as psychologists during the COVID restriction times. So we asked them about the advantages and perceived obstacles in online psychosocial work. And we collected the data through, it's not 2000, last year and a half. So we did an online survey, we did numerous focus groups and individual interviews with our graduates or people working within the healthcare system, within the social services, and within the school systems, because each of the system might have different specifics. And we asked specifically about diagnostics, therapy, and counseling for children, but also for adults. And again, some of the findings which are quite similar to virtual teamwork and virtual teaching is that there might be a problem in performing some tasks online. For example, well, in our case, it was the diagnostics using psychodiagnostic methods online. There were quite a lot of concerns about it, not just due to data privacy, but also because of the validity of the results, because you never really know who's sitting at the other end of the computer, especially if they do not have the microphone and the camera and all the technical equipment. And also the psychodiagnostic methods were not always designed to be administered online. So you have some material with which you actually should have like physical contact with, and this was impossible to do online. So that was quite interesting to see what the practitioners think about that. And also they were really discussing the client types or maybe diagnosis types and their suitability for distant care. So we were talking a lot about people for whom distant psychosocial care, for example, therapy or counseling, was quite all right and really, really suitable. And the groups that might have not felt comfortable in doing that. And there were quite a lot of different opinions depending on where the people worked and with whom the people worked. But basically, what we found out is that, or actually I have a slide for that, so I'm just going to skip there. But there might be people who just in general wouldn't like distant contact, whereas others would prefer that even above the face-to-face contact, maybe because of social anxiety. But one of the problems we are still dealing with is the informed consent and other administrative and technical requirements. Again, not a perfect situation. So if you were interested in some of the most frequent obstacles in psychosocial work online or remotely, as named by our respondents, again, the absence or poor quality of technical equipment was one of the most dominating, but also the lack of privacy and interference from others was an issue, because if you come to a psychologist's office, you are alone in there and nobody disturbing you because the door is closed. But if you are conducting this from your own home, there might be your family members coming around. You never know who comes to your room, especially if you're a kid. So this, well, I wouldn't say threat, but obstacle was quite, prevalent among our respondents. And again, there was this feeling of impersonal or impersonality of the encounter. so that it's not just the same as if you see people face to face. So what I wanted to show by all this is that when you go digital, and no matter if you mean like teamwork and group work in a business setting or teaching setting, or even psychosocial care, so like individual work setting with psychological aspects. First of all, you have to ensure that technical equipment at all sides, and that everybody knows what to do and how to do it. You shouldn't forget about the people and their relationships, so-called human side, because they really place an emphasis on that, and it might be hindered due to the remote nature of online teaching, work, etc. And that both quantitative as well as qualitative research are important, because you can't always get all the answers from just surveys. So conducting discussions with people might be quite interesting and might bring really interesting results. And just, you know, engage people because they feel disengaged as it is by just sitting in front of the computer. So coming up with tasks which they can really perform and do and cooperate with others and communicate with others might be really encouraging for their general engagement, for example, in the program or subject, etc. So that was it. Sorry for my rapid speech, but I tried to catch up with the time. And any questions you might have, here it comes. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, Lucy. Thank you for your talk, and the floor is open to questions.